Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. My name is Gabriel Sanders. I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Visitor Experience here at the Center for Jewish History. I think first have to start out with who are the Mets fans here tonight? Pretty good. I think that'll be a theme this evening. The Center for Jewish History is home to the largest archive of Jewish materials outside of Israel. We're home to the American Jewish Historical Society, the American Sephardi Federation, Leo Baeck Institute, YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, and Yeshiva University Museum. Together, the Partners Archives comprise, again, the largest archive of Jewish materials outside of Israel. You're welcome to access those materials through our reading room and Genealogy Institute, and we hope to see you back here for more upcoming programs and exhibits. Tonight's screening of the film about Hank Greenberg is a 25th anniversary screening and 90th anniversary commemoration of Hank Greenberg's stand on Yom Kippur. Fittingly, we're showing the film before Yom Kippur. I want to thank Aviva Kempner so much for showing the film here, and we're honored to have Ira Berkow, Steve Greenberg, and our moderator, Rebecca Alpert, who will join us later for the conversation, and we'll have audience Q&A. So I'm going to invite now Aviva to say a few words to introduce the film. We'll show the film and then have that conversation. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks. Oh, wait, technical. Ready? So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And I think we would have had more people if the Mets weren't playing and winning, but it's okay. By the way, the film will be later this month at the New Plaza Cinema, so stay tuned on our website. People ask me, why did I do a film on Hank Greenberg? So it was actually, I don't know if you realize this, Steve, that I went to him 38 years ago, and I walked in and I said, you know, I just heard your father died. And when I grew up in Detroit, all I heard on Yom Kippur, going to Kol Nidra services, was about how Hank Greenberg didn't play on Yom Kippur. It was something he would tell my brother and I. As a matter of fact, I thought Hank Greenberg was part of Kol Nidra services. And it still is. In any event, there are two women in the audience I really want to especially point out. First of all, Marion Sears Hunter, who's the editor. I call this my bat mitzvah movie because it did take us 13 years, mostly because we were raising money. And the other person is, you'll see the Cheshla Foundation, which is named after my grandparents, and Eva Fogelman is one of the members. And next to her is you'll see her at the very end. She has a cameo, but when she was much younger. And that's my niece, Delaney Cheshla Kempner. So I partly say this because years ago when I brought the film out, I was on a radio show, and I'm walking off the stage, and one guy says to the other, sports guys, boy, she knows a lot about baseball for a broad. So I just want you to know that this film was made by two broads. My brother's also on the board. Seriously, I think for a lot of us, how many of us grew up as Hank Greenberg as a hero? Not only, I know there's some Detroiters, but way beyond that. And I think it's really important in this kind of atmosphere to know that a film like this, that's someone who stood up to anti-Semitism as we're experiencing it now. So when you see the film, we can talk about that more. But then there are two men, both Steve, who said yes, and is so good in the film, and has helped me now with the remastering. And we can talk later, but a lot of it is about getting the rights paid for music. You wouldn't believe what they cost, but you'll understand when you hear the beautiful music. And of course, Ira, who did the autobiography, or edited Hank's autobiography. Without their help and support, I never could have made this film. So mostly we'll talk after, but I just want to dedicate the film to two things. One is to bringing back the hostages alive and peace, ceasefire. And this film was made in Washington, D.C., which is the nation's capital, but unfortunately, we don't have statehood. So wherever I go, I always say, dedicate to statehood. And please stay after, and please, if you have to go back, well, we should probably know the Mets score by then. It's 4-0 now? 6-0. But who's bragging? But you never know. That's the beauty of baseball. Let's hope it stays. But the weekends of October 26th and November 2nd and 3rd, we will be at the New Plaza Theater, and we hope to see you there. See you soon after. I've seen the movie, so I'm going out. I interviewed her for the film on Molly Goldberg, Gertrude Berg, and when she gave me that, but we have to place it up earlier because it's hard for people to stay through the credits. But while I'm here, I want to mention my friend Julie Cohen's here, who actually made the wonderful movie on RBG. You want to raise your hand? And just finished one on peace in the Middle East, right? To be talked about later. Isn't he as cute as ever? And smart, both of them.
Hi, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I will tell you that I'm a Brooklynite. I grew up with Sandy Koufax. To me, he was everything, right? He was all the things that we now know. Hank Greenberg was, because watching this film, Aviva, just changed my world. I mean, it made me realize that Sandy wasn't the only thing out there, and that a very important person preceded him. And watching this film 25 years later, again, reinforced that reality. He was what I've called a macho mensch. And I think, Dershowitz kind of said that also. This is this is the combination. He's the combination of exactly what you see as a wonderful human being and a strong figure that changed the way people looked at Jews. So I want to start with that question, Aviva. We talked a little bit before about anti-Semitism, and the film really focuses tremendously on the anti-Semitism that Hank experienced. And I guess, can you reflect a little bit about what you see the difference between then and now?
Yes, but I have to tell you one story.
Please.
The groupie is still alive. She's 101. She's living in Philly. I know her son well. Her son cast me. And her original last name was Greenberg, but we never wrote that down because we were afraid people would say, oh, she married him, she just took the name. So I have to explain it, and I can't wait to show it to Harriet soon. My father always talked about, he was originally from Ponyvich, Lithuania, grew up, then he came to Pittsburgh, and he always talked about at Fort Riley, he had a bad experience with anti-Semitism, but later on, not so much. Coming to Detroit after he was in the military government, and I was born in and met my mother. But for him, Hank, and baseball, it was this love of baseball that my brother and I got from him. As a matter of fact, when my dad made Aliyah to Israel, he said he's going to miss two things, baseball and his kids, and I think it was that order. But in any event, the day I heard he died, I was getting dressed for my opening of Partisans of Vilna. I said I had to do it. And I had to do it because he meant so much to immigrant Jews, and not just Jews, but just immigrants. There's a thing about baseball. For me, it's the golden age of baseball. I mean, I'm enjoying the playoffs, and hopefully I'll go to a game tomorrow. But I still think the top team in the American League should be playing the top team in the, in the National League, especially since I know Stan Katz and somehow the Dodgers never make it. But there was a time that I think they really love playing the game, although Steve says to me this week when I'm emailing him about the Mets winning, they look like they're having a good time when they're winning. But I think it's a little more than that. You obviously weren't making the money. And, Sandy deserves all the credit, but you can always alternate a picture. And what he did on Yom Kippur, in the height of domestic anti-Semitism in Detroit with Coughlin, I don't know, there are other people here from Detroit. Whenever my dad would drive by the Shrine of the Little Flower, he'd go, that anti-Semite. And people in Detroit say, all their fathers said the same thing. So let me just tell you a little story of what I just learned. I took a tour of the Shrine of the Little Flower for the first time in my life. And it's beautiful. They have all these wonderful things. But some members of Shard Tzedek, where we did an event, have been talking to the Archdiocese, and there's a panel that used to say, allegedly an anti-Semite. They have now taken down allegedly. So, you know, they haven't made it public, but if you go there, that's true. Not sure that quite answered your question, but that's what I wanted to say.
Why am I not surprised?
Ira,
you want to take it?
I grew up in Chicago, and my baseball consciousness started in 1948, the year after Hank Greenberg retired. But I had an uncle, Julius, who was very Jewish-oriented, and he loved Hank Greenberg. And he would teach me Yiddish. And one of the early lessons that I had with my uncle Julius, maybe I was 5 or 6 years old, but I had the impression that Hank Greenberg was equal to George Washington. And he was better looking, and his hair wasn't as white at the time. But as time went on, I grew more and more fond of Hank Greenberg, and then I met him, and it seemed, and of course, the first question I asked him was, did they really pitch to you in 1938 at the end of the season? When you weren't so-called allowed to break Babe Ruth's record? And he said, they pitched to me, I just didn't hit a home run.
Yeah, Jimmy Fox probably would have told you the same thing. But I know, Steve, what do you think your dad would think about baseball today with all that gambling? And what do you think about all the sign stealing too? And, you know, pitch clock. What do you think?
I guess I was prescient with that sign stealing 25 years ago. Maybe they saw it in Houston and they thought it was okay. He loved the game. I think he would be in awe of Aaron Judge and Ohtani and the physical. He always marveled at the basketball players and the football players and what they could do athletically. And now we're seeing in baseball the level of athleticism. So I think he would love the game. It's not about, he wouldn't care about the long hair. He wouldn't care about the beards. Probably bothers me more than it would him. I think he sees the game, or would have seen the game, as having advanced in terms of the ability of the players and strength and conditioning, and the money would not have bothered him at all. So he'd be a fan.
And he and Bill Beck would have done much better with the Chicago White Sox.
I'm not going to bash my friend Jerry.
And I look at Reinsdorf's in my Mo Berg film, but yeah.
Well, but I remember in the early '80s, I had developed a relationship with Hank. I was the reporter, and he was, the great baseball player. But we just somehow or other we hit it off. I once used a Jewish expression with him, and he liked that.
Which one?
Huh?
What expression?
I don't remember what the expression was. It might have been Mazel Tov. I'll just say one thing about Ira, and I'll give my wife Myrna, who's here, kudos. When my dad was diagnosed with kidney cancer and had his kidney surgically removed and was recuperating, he didn't want anyone to know that he had been sick or was sick. So he stopped going to the tennis club, and we made up all sorts of excuses about he was out of town or why he wasn't there. And he would sit at his home in Beverly Hills, loved to sit in the sun. You see from some of the videos there, and read, which he loved to do. Myrna bought him a tape recorder and said, Hank, why don't you tell your story? Write a book. And we showed him how to turn it on and turn it off, and bought him the tapes. Every day I'd swing by the house, and my secretary would transcribe it, and it ended up as a 600-page manuscript of and the first line was, it's used in the film by Aviva, my parents had 4 children. One of them was a bum. I was the bum. And he goes on from there to talk about his cancer and everything else. We conned Ira into flying out to Los Angeles because when my dad was virtually on his deathbed, we had this manuscript. We didn't know what to do with it. And we said, we need someone to come and edit this and turn it into a book. Who would you like to have do that? And he said, well, it could only be one of 2 people. He said, either James Michener or Ira Berkow. Well, I didn't know how to reach Michener, but I knew where to get Ira. So we called Ira, who I didn't know, but knew of, and he flew out to California, showed up with Myrna and me and my stepmother, a little Italian restaurant, and we told him about the book, and he said, well, where's Hank? I said, well, he's not coming. And then we told him how ill he was. And Ira took this 600 pages and edited it down and turned it into, there have been a number of biographies written, but this is, in my view, the authentic autobiography of my dad. So Ira, that's where it all began.
Thank you. And at first, I had just finished writing, it was 1986, and I had just completed and published a biography of a very important person to me. It was Red Smith, the great sports columnist, literary figure, and I spent 4 years at it, and I just finished it, and now Steve calls me, and who I didn't know, and he wondered if I would write the book with working with Hank's manuscript, and I loved Hank, but I just felt that I was too tired now after 4 years of not only writing the Red Smith book, but also doing a New York Times sports column 3 days a week. And so I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do it. And then I was on a train a week later going to Philadelphia, and I was thinking about this. And I said, look, my Uncle Julius was a great fan of Hank Greenberg, and I was a great fan of Hank Greenberg's when I met him. I'm Jewish, I'm a writer. If not me, who else? And so I'm sure there were others, but I decided, well, I'm going to do it. And I called Steve and I said, have you gotten a writer yet for the Hank Greenberg autobiography? And Steve said no. And I said, well, I'd like to do it. And he said, you're on.
And let me just tell you about what just happened in the remastering, because Marion really caught it. In the first version, I mean, the original version of the film, which was 16, bumped up to 35, we had used a lot of Hank's own words or testimony, but Marion said, we got it, in the lab, we got to clean up the voice. And with modern technology, you can do it now. You take the old prints, but also with sound. So I have to commend Marion to even improving not only what Hank said, but how you hear it.
Well, and since I'm sitting next to her, let me just say a word about Aviva. Aviva contacted me, and I don't remember the first conversation, but I know early on it was a story of her dad telling her about Hank and reading that he had passed away, and immediately coming to the conclusion that she had to make this film. I was skeptical. I don't think my dad would have wanted a film made about him. That's why he didn't really write his biography during his lifetime. And I was somewhat skeptical. It did take 13 years.
My bat mitzvah film.
It did take 13 years. The first cut was 4.5 hours, I think, Aviva, or maybe 5.5 hours. And there was not a shot or a scene that Aviva wanted to cut. The last 12 years was editing down to this masterpiece, and in all seriousness, it was a labor of love for Aviva, and I think these are the bookends in my mind. This film and Ira's book that tell the story.
Steve, excuse me, I think it was a labor of love for all of us.
Right. When I first went to Steve, and he said, well, there's a book being done. And I said, don't worry, I'm sure it'll come out before the film. And a lot of it was raising the money. But I have to thank, there's a group of men in Detroit who run the Hank Greenberg, what do they call it? Annual
Hank Greenberg Memorial
Annual
Charity
golf
Golf
Charity
event.
And it's because of them, every year they would bring other players or other people. I mean, they essentially they cast it for me. Although I would have liked to have made it in less years. And by the way, right now, the Ben Heck film, which I'm finishing, is 5 hours long. But that may be a 2-part series.
So yeah, Aviva, I actually was thinking that all of that stuff that's missing, that's another film. You've got another Hank Greenberg film in you. I mean, Hank is an
No, we
owner.
have bonus features on the DVD.
But seriously, Hank's role as an owner, as part of baseball business, baseball is a business. And what he did, the things that, again, are just written at the end, I think are extremely important accomplishments. The connection between Robinson and Curt Flood and what he did to bring the blacks into the Cleveland Indians. And I'm wondering if, any of you have some thoughts about what we didn't see tonight that Aviva's going to make in the next Hank Greenberg
Well,
film.
the last
I would
10
do
minutes.
Sandy if he said yes, but he doesn't.
He never will. The last 10 minutes of the film represent the Hank Greenberg that I knew. I didn't know that guy at 23 years. And I think about it all the time. 23 years old, in Detroit, no agent, no business manager, and he has to make this monumental decision about playing or not playing on the Jewish holidays. And I asked him about it, and he never really could explain it, how he was able to manage all that and still keep playing at that level. But that's a fictional character. That might as well be Gary Cooper playing Lou Gehrig, because I didn't know that person, that 20, 30, 40-year-old man. I knew the later Hank Greenberg, the Curt Flood testimony, and I knew him as a business executive. The only time I ever saw him play was in an old-timers game. He popped up to second base, so I never saw him get a hit. So when I watched the film, there's 2 parts of it. There's the dad I knew sitting at the tennis club. I was there the day that he did that interview in the seersucker shirt with Dick Schaap at the Beverly Hills Tennis Club. I was at many of those lunches with Walter Matthau. So that's and I knew him as my dad, but not as that iconic hero.
Any thoughts, Ira, about just the Hank Greenberg that we didn't see tonight, the one that Steve knew?
I have a little theory, though. Poor Mo Berg, who was a much different personality, and of course was very courageous as a spy, but not, knew 7 languages and couldn't hit in any of them. His father never went to one game. His grandparents were so supportive and would schlep all the way to Detroit and be there for him. And another reason, Hank really liked Detroit is it was a good home run field to hit home runs. Let's be clear. Now, the rifle story would never hold up today, true? But what I think is interesting, again, going to Beaumont, Texas, where wearing uniforms in 100-degree weather in wool uniforms, and this other player goes up to him and looking for his horns. I mean, how do you handle something like that? And I think a lot of it is the self-confidence as a person from his parents. And I have this other thing that I really want to do, 2 things because of the film. One is to put asterisks by his name, DiMaggio's name, Williams, who went to 2 wars, and other feller, because the stats they would have had, I mean, Sabre people have calculated the kind of RBIs Hank would have, they still would not be breakable. And these guys went off to war, to fight for our democracy, and I think there should be more on that. The other thing is, the basis of the horns? It's because Michelangelo's statue of Moses has horns, because they misinterpreted rays. The interpretation from Hebrew, I guess into Italian then, was horns. And I've gone to Rome. Have you gone to Rome and seen the Michelangelo statue? Well, I've come out saying to people, they didn't even know what I was saying, you got to write a sign that he misunderstood. So at least I'll write an essay about it. But can you imagine someone coming up to you and saying that, and it's a fellow player? I just don't know how he did it.
Steve, here's a question I've never asked you. You played minor league baseball for 5 years. You played a AAA for 3 years. And I always love the story of, 2 things. the story of when you were called up to the major leagues, and that story was secondly,
Did you get a cup of coffee?
And secondly, what was it like having played as the son of Hank Greenberg? So those are two stories.
I'm only going to tell one. In the interest of time, I'll do the latter, not the former.
Well, I'm going to tell the story.
So I did play 5 years in the minor leagues, and Myrna and I drove around the country in our Dodge van, from town to town with plastic dishes. I think we got some wonderful china for our wedding, but we had plastic dishes when we were in the minor leagues because they were unbreakable, obviously. But every town I would go in, first time I'm there, sports writer in that local town would come up and want to do an interview. And the first question would be, can you hit like your dad? And I'd say, yeah, that's why I'm here in Burlington, North Carolina tonight. So what was it like? I guess it went off my back eventually. I just, it didn't seem to bother me. Dad didn't come around to watch me play
That's
much.
what I was going to ask you.
Because he didn't want to make me nervous. And it probably did make me nervous, although I will say that he probably came once a season in the minor leagues, and when I was in college, he'd come to 2 or 3 games. And I hit an inordinate, given my power, percentage of home runs when he was at games, but I did get nervous. And he knew it, and he'd come, and they'd announce Hank Greenberg's in the stands, and he didn't want to sort of create that disruption. So in the ordinary, I thought it was sort of comical that sports writers, Ira, couldn't come up with a better question than, can you hit like your dad? And I'd say, well, did you look at my batting average? But I'm not telling the other story.
But you were a hair short of making it, Steve, to the major leagues.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over to the audience, but I want to ask you guys just one more question.
I'm a
You wanna
gal.
say just one
I'm
more
not
thing?
a guy.
Oh,
You said you guys. I'm a gal.
okay, I think of myself as a guy, so what can I say? Things have changed over the years.
You all.
Hank didn't play on Yom Kippur, and that was again a very, very important piece of your story, and it was a very important piece of his story. On Friday night, if there happens to be a 5th game between the Mets and the Phillies, whether that's likely or not is a whole other story. The Harrison Bader for the Mets and Garrett Stubbs for the Phillies, they're both Jewish, and it's Kol Nidre. What are they going to do?
Well, I think, didn't Bregman for the Astros have this a few years ago? And I forget what he did. I think he might have played.
He played.
Yeah, I think he did play.
But talk about the World Series in '35. Hank broke his wrist, and if he hadn't broke his, God intervened, and if she hadn't intervened, he would have played in that World Series, right, on Yom Kippur.
Well, we don't know.
Well.
That's a hypothetical.
Probably Friday night's going to be hypothetical, too. I worry about my Phillies, but that's a whole other story. Folks.
Can I just tell about my Walter Matthau story? So Walter Matthau comes to actually my cousin's house, Arthur Hiller, who did Love Story, and he comes with his agent, Lenny. So I'm interviewing him, and when you interview someone, and they both did beautiful jobs, you have to look at whoever the interviewee is, and the camera's on the side. So he kept on talking to Lenny. So I finally said, Mr. Matthau, and I'm not, me, would you please look at me? The camera will capture you. Without hesitation, he said, your husband has to look at you. I don't have to look at you, which was even funnier because I'm not married. So then I thought, my dad was a Yiddishist. This guy's so funny. Let me have him answer some questions with a little bit of Yiddish. So I said it to him. For 10 minutes, all he did was answer me in Yiddish. But we never could find that tape, so anyhow. But Feller scared me. He's the only one that scared me. And I sat down, I said, hello, Mr. Feller. How long is this going to take? I said, half hour. You're lying. But it turns out, wasn't your dad very helpful to Feller? And he would have done it. He shouldn't have been that critical because he really was someone that Hank had helped him, right?
Every batter in the American League was scared of Feller, so why should you be different? So he was. That's why he won 300 and whatever games.
I had a conversation with Bob Feller, but it wasn't about Hank. It was at the time of the O.J. Simpson trial.
Wow.
And I respected Bob Feller's opinion on things. And so we talked we were in Cooperstown, and we walked to the corner, and then we were going to separate at the corner after having lunch. And I said to Feller, I said, I have a question for you. We've been talking baseball the whole time. And I said, and now the O.J. trial is on. And I said, Bob, did O.J. do it? And he looked at me now I'm saying this out of the blue, out of talk about Joe DiMaggio and Hank Greenberg and so forth. And I said, did O.J. do it? And he looked at me and he said, well, if he didn't, who did? And that's as good an answer as I've ever gotten about the O.J. trial, which has nothing to do with what we're up here for. But.
I've made a documentary film about a sports legend, and I am in awe of this film. It is extraordinary. And I have a few questions before I get to that. Mr. Berkow, I have so enjoyed your writing for so many years. I'm just thrilled that I get a chance to hear you in person. So I have 3 questions. One is for Aviva, as a woman doing this film, I have to imagine you hit some roadblocks and some challenges, no? Let me just also say that I'm
Just raising the money, that was a challenge.
well, that's always a challenge, whether you're a man or a woman, okay. And let me just also say the editing in this, your editors, phenomenal. Phenomenal editing, just blew me away. So the next question I have for you is, how did you find the groupie? I forget her name.
Oh, okay. So I go to this Havara collective in Washington, and there's someone named Coleman there, and he's from Detroit, and he knows I'm doing it, and he says, you know, you got to interview my mother. So her son cast him, and I made sure he came to the movie, and we called Harriet. I've since visited her, but now I got to arrange showing her the film.
It is a brilliant
Thanks. You know,
insertion.
I think what's really important is my dad's voice is in all those men, mostly men, but also Harriet. That's me. I mean, I had the biggest crush on Rocky Calavito. And my biggest disappointment was because Hank did hire him. I thought, oh my God, my crush, I'll finally be able to meet him. He wouldn't be interviewed. That was my biggest disappointment. He ran I think he still does it, a mushroom farm in Pennsylvania. And then just hearing men talk, I mean, they're just so funny. The fans, I mean, there's nothing like it.
And one more question for Steve. What was your dad like as a father? But I was really impressed at the end with the list of all the things he did as an owner in baseball to break down barriers. And I'm just wondering, as a father, did he impart those things to you? What was he like as a dad?
I think for my brother and my sister and me, we would all say that he showed us how to live. He didn't lecture. I mean, it's interesting. Wasn't religious in his later life. I mean, he was raised Orthodox, bar mitzvahed, grew up in an Orthodox family and became disillusioned with so-called organized religion. But he did say, and would always say, that his code was the 10 Commandments. A little bit of irony. So he lived his life. He made it clear when we did things that, let's say, disappointed him. But I think as a father, he led by example. I think what his teammates would have said too. He was the hardest worker on the ball field, and I think he tried to set a good example. It just came naturally to him. And fortunately, I think all 3 of us tried to follow that.
Hi, I'm Debbie Kling, and I'm the president of the West Side Little League.
Oh,
which is,
great.
And I've been the president for 17 years, and as a woman, it's an interesting experience. I grew up in South Chicago. What part of Chicago did you grow up in, Mr. Berkow?
What part of Chicago?
Where in Chicago?
I grew up in South Chicago.
I grew up first on the west side of Chicago,
Sure.
Capone era.
Use your mic.
Capone's area, actually, not his era. And then on the far north side, went to Sullivan High School.
Okay. So you were probably, were you a Cubs fan?
You're not aware that I was a pitcher and first baseman at Sullivan High School? Our Sullivan wide receivers down here. Yeah.
So anyway, so I was a White Sox fan because I was on the south side. But I did want to mention one thing. When I'm 70 years old, and in the 60s, I went to Girl Scout camp up in Wisconsin. And as Mr. Berkow knows, Chicago has all these ethnic enclaves, still does. And I ran into a girl who came from one of them, and she may have been Polish, she may have been German, I'm not sure. And when she found out I was Jewish, she asked about my horns. So even in the 60s, you could have that experience of anti-Semitism.
I had that experience in St. Louis in '64.
Right.
Same thing.
And interestingly enough, after October 7th, I've lived in New York for years. I had dinner with some friends who had grown up in New York or on Long Island, and they were just really shocked at the anti-Semitism that was being revealed. And I said, I grew up in South Chicago, and I was very much aware of this. And I think sometimes when you grow up in New York or on Long Island, it's a little bit of a Jewish cocoon, or it was. And so that's why it was so shocking. It was not really shocking to me. So.
Well, one thing I am intending to do after I finish up, or just finishing up the music rights, which is like hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, it's the greatest music of the 20s and 30s. But since this film, I'm only using composers, is to raise the money. I want this film at all the Hillels, and also the one I made of my mother and my uncle, to sort of answer the line, go back to Poland. But not just for Jewish kids, because I think it's important for everyone to see how hatred and ethnicity, hatred against groups is just wrong. And through sports is one of the great equalizers, I think. I want to mention one other story because of the idea in generosity of Steve. When the film came out in '86, is that when it came? No, '99. I started in '86, sorry. That's when Partisans came out. Steve flew up Ted Williams. I only got Ted Williams verbally, his audio, but he brought him up, and we were at the Yogi Berra Museum, which was great. You remember when you brought him up? And of course they had a competition, but a great friendship. So here I'm sitting at the Yogi Berra Museum, and Yogi's sitting there, and his wife is sitting there. She gets up and she says, love the film. Yogi gets up, pats his tush and says, these seats are hard. That's what Yogi Berra thought of the film. So is that a great line? I think he liked it. But, it's this love of baseball between people and the love of parents. I mean, I think that's what bonds us, and the love of history. That's why I've maintained both a friendship but also support. Because I think when you show how people care for your heroes, then, that can be, I always want to do positive films about heroes. And somehow in this atmosphere that we have now, I think this film is even more necessary. So talk to me about bookings. I know I've got men's clubs down. They told me that in Detroit I should do the circuit, but I want to do universities, and I really want young people to see it. So we should talk about showing it to the kids.
You got the mic.
Me?
The mic.
Mr. Greenberg, when is the last time we heard from that groupie? Recently, wasn't it?
That was a different groupie. I'm not going to. There's a really
personal question.
Quasi-deranged,
I'm the wife.
Deranged woman who actually wrote a book about her relationship with my dad in the 1930s and sent it to me with photographs.
That's not the one who broke her leg, is
That's
it?
not your Harriet.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
No,
I
there was
didn't
someone who
respond.
broke her. Whoa.
Gabe, you got the mic.
There must be a statute of limitations, Steve.
young lady who helped make the film, and Rocky Colavito was the Bronx guy that people, and when they brought up Crotona Park, my brother played in Crotona Park, and the guy unfortunately died. Ed Kranepool hit more home runs than he did at Monroe High School, happened to be. He certainly was not Hank Greenberg. Ed Kranepool, may he rest in peace.
So I wanted you to know that my cousin-in-law is the head of Parks and Rec. He's on the city council, Shaker Krishna. And I've recently contacted him and I said, why don't we take the film to Crotona Park or to the high school that Hank went, which his sister-in-law said everyone sat, next to him, which I think is one of the funniest lines in the film. Because I think also maybe should get like a statue, not a statue, but some kind of cornerstone in Hank's name, because I don't think people realize.
Just quick to say to you, the coach at Monroe was he signed players. He was in the White Sox, but they came to visit somebody. They were looking for a catcher, and they happened to see him. Tiger Scout.
Right.
That's why he signed him.
So we got time for one last question. And
Thanks so much for this wonderful discussion. I had a question about whether, like Jackie Robinson, when he was brought into the majors, was there any preparation for bringing a Jew into Major League Baseball? Was that ever a discussion, or is there anything known about that?
No, absolutely none, which again is part of the mystery to me about how this kid from the Bronx could have dealt with it the way he did. We talked about the Texas League. I think he was 20 or 21 when he played in the Texas League. He was in Beaumont, Texas, not exactly a hotbed of Jewish activity, and won the Most Valuable Player Award. I found out later, I actually found a little plaque. He's been inducted into the Texas State Sports Hall of Fame. So there you go, based on his 1 year in Beaumont. But did they prepare him for what he was going to face? Absolutely not.
actually, John McGraw brought Jews into baseball. He brought Mose Solomon and Andy Cohen before
One of the
before
first
Greenberg.
players.
And there were many Jews who played and changed their names, as the film points out. But McGraw saw this New York audience and thought, I want Jewish players. And Andy Cohen actually was an extraordinary good player, very popular, but didn't last very long. And neither can we this evening. I think we're just about at the end. Aviva, I'll bet you want the last
Well,
word.
can you imagine then later on, as an owner, he goes to Arizona and he can't check into a hotel? I mean, to me, that's the most maddening. And that's why I use the scene from Gentleman's Agreement. I mean, it's just unbelievably to me, and the reaction in the film, I think probably, did he ever talk to you about that one? No. Look at the courage of even going off into the military, Anyhow, thank you all for coming.
And thank you, Aviva, for an amazing film, and to Ira and Steve for wonderful comments. And
October 26th weekend and November 2nd or 3rd, New Plaza Cinema.